Hey everyone, it's me, David Chen. Welcome to my YouTube channel slash Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Chen. I'm here today, as usual, to discuss the latest episode of What If streaming right now on Disney Plus. What If Episode 8? What If Ultron won? We're going to spoil and recap this week's episode. Joining me today, as always, he is one of the hosts of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, Dan Gvozden. Dan, how's it going today?
What if I guessed everything that happened in this episode last week? That's kind of where I'm at right now.
As always, you can find the audio podcast version of this at patreon.com/Dave Chen and check out more of Dan's work at amazingspidertalk.com. I think this is going to be a brief recap episode. I'm just going to put that out. We're going to try. Every single week we try, and it's always like minimum 35 minutes, which is longer than the episode of the show itself. But we're going to try this week. I thought the plot of this one was relatively simple compared to the other ones, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But let's talk about overall thoughts. What if Ultron won? What did you think of this episode, Dan?
Honestly, going into this, I kind of hoped that this would not do what this episode does and
This
stick with the end.
show or this episode?
This particular episode, I mean, I was hoping the show wouldn't do what this episode does, which is really connect all these things together, and we're building towards something. But I got to be honest, I kind of liked, I felt like the past few episodes have been a little stagnant. I'm getting used to the formula, and I enjoyed that this one kind of shook up the formula, even if we kind of expected it to, and that we're getting more about the Watcher here. Like that, like made it really worthwhile to me. I think it's a thin episode. Ultron and the Watcher are not exactly the most like complicated, compelling characters in the
Uh
world.
huh. Yep.
Um, but I thought that the animation and action direction was probably at its best in this episode. And it's just kind of nice to see things starting to come together. If they're ultimately going to do that. And I thought the way they established the rules and the visuals of it was really neat. There was a lot to like here, even if some elements of it felt kind of like recycled from earlier things. We've seen the end of the world a dozen times now, or that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. We have zombies, which might as well, Ultron's forces might as well be zombies. We've been living in the post-apocalypse. So I think this episode could have hit harder had we not been living in that visual language for so long. But I thought it was like a fun, chance to revisit a new world and see some splashy visuals and finally start to kind of bring the Watcher to the forefront. And so that I enjoyed that about it.
I agree with pretty much everything you said in the sense that what's really cool about this episode is they spend 7 episodes prior to this kind of hinting at Watu's situation, and he's always separated from everything else. He's always watching things at a remove. He cannot intervene, and you feel like. But one thing you have felt like is he's kind of safe from everything that's happening. Like literally, the universe is ending, but Watu is safe. Like he's no one can mess with him. Basically, Doctor Strange heard him like talk out loud or think to himself, but
Right.
he's kind of in his own world. And what's great about this episode is it breaches that safety, and that's kind of genuinely cool. I think I brought this example up in a recent podcast I had, or a recent recording of some kind I had. I don't remember what, but have you seen Fleabag?
I have not
Oh
actually.
man, brilliant show, and I will therefore I will try not to spoil it at all, but I will say that like part of the show is the main character does these direct to camera addresses, right? Like
Right. I've seen it over my wife's shoulder. She started it without me. And, it's one of those things where now we watch other shows together. So you can't really fit it in. You know what I mean? And anyway,
that Fleabag was during the time of your lives when you didn't watch anything together, and now you do all the time.
she
So
snuck on that one ahead of me. Right.
mm,
So I can like always hold it against her that she moved ahead on something without me.
there is the main character in that show directly addresses the camera, So she'll be like in a scene interacting with someone, and then she'll turn to the camera and say, "Get a load of this guy," something like that. That's not really what she says, but she'll say something like that. And one thing that the show does in season two is basically make you more deeply understand what other people are seeing when she's doing that. Do you know what I'm
Mm,
saying?
yeah.
And I always like when a show creates this reality, doesn't explain it, but then like upsets the security of that reality. Like it's just very unsettling feeling. Um, and the idea that a Vision, or sorry, an Ultron with all the Infinity Stones could do that, I think is really cool. Yeah, and seeing Watu in this situation and like what Watu is trying to do, all that stuff was cool.
I really like the visualization of it too, the kind of like kaleidoscopic mirror realm that he lives in. That's not anything from the comics. This is a
Mm,
creation, and it
I
really
agree.
ties the whole package together with the opening credit and all those splintering mirrors of the multiverse. I thought that was really neat.
There are a bunch of comments in the chat right now that might be worth addressing. First of all, like some people are commenting on how like Thanos, Langley Neely says like they could have dealt with Thanos a bit better. I love Frank says the Thanos one was really cheap. I thought the episode was going to be about how Ultron will acquire the Infinity Stones, but they just conveniently handed it to him. Yeah, I mean the way these episodes, I think you just have to accept that these episodes are going to gloss over a bunch of stuff, right? Like that's one thing we've come to learn is how did Doctor Strange still get his training even though he didn't lose his hands? Like we're just going to have to accept that that happens, and there's like a bunch of other things you have to accept. So like, oh yes, Thanos just shows up and gets murdered. Okay, fine. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I think that one is particularly egregious because the whole plot of Infinity War is that like or a big part of the plot of Infinity War is about removing the Mind Stone from Vision's head
Yes.
so that like if Thanos comes for him, he can survive. And ultimately that's like not the case. And the whole war of at Wakanda is all about the Mind Stone. And if we knew that the Vision could just zap all Thanos in half, which is especially poignant given Thanos's getting rid of half of things in that moment. But it does just feels
Well,
cheap. It's like why
maybe
didn't they do
Vision
that
couldn't
all
have done
along?
that, Dan. Maybe it was only Ultron equipped with the Mind Stone that could have done that. See, Vision wouldn't have had the vision to do that.
Mm,
You see?
I see what you're doing there
You
and
see
what
what I
you're
did?
saying there. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that's probably a fair no prize, but just watching it, it felt like a sin, like ding,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I was like, what? That shouldn't happen.
Other things that were cool about this episode, action overall in the series has been very strong, and I thought the action was pretty solid. It runs into this whole situation of like, is the way that like if a robot was taking over the world, or in this case, I guess the robot has all the Infinity Stones, right? Um,
Right.
is sending huge packs of robots roving the planet connected to the hive mind like the best way to implement this? Like it's kind of like Skynet. Would they really send a robot back in time, uh, or maybe like probably a bomb or a nuke might be more efficient, right? Like
Well, it's funny because like Ultron has no problem like destroying whole like solar systems, but for some reason he's like precious about Earth and the resistance on Earth enough that he's not willing. I mean, I guess he nuked the entire surface of the planet, but like there's still two humans putting up a resistance to him that he seems to not like be willing to just execute the destruction of the planet over.
I think the existence of Terminator is actually invoked in this episode, if I recall correctly. Right? Doesn't Captain Marvel mention Skynet in
Yeah,
this?
she says like I've seen the robot killer robot movie. It doesn't need a sequel, right?
Mm.
Because she left before Terminator 2 came out. She was
Yeah.
like flying around the universe.
Yeah. 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 It's too bad because Terminator 2, pretty great movie. Just gonna put that
Yeah,
out
she
there.
would be wrong because that's a great sequel.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, anything else you want to say about this episode, like just overall, before we get into any specific scenes?
Not particularly. I mean, it is interesting that it kind of like abandoned that A plot, but I'm more forgiving on it because this is definitely not like trying to pretend that this is a self-contained story like the previous ones. Like I
Right.
know we're going to revisit Natasha and Clint in the next episode.
I think there's some good questions in the chat here. We can just answer questions in chat. Honestly, there's a lot of good stuff here. So Big Blue Boy Scout. This is a great question to have Dan Gvozden around for. Says, quote, I want to see Peter Parker struggle to pay his bills, not get in a fistfight with 10 versions of him from across the multiverse. Now, I have not seen the trailer for No Way Home or whatever the new movie is, but my understanding is it will deal with the multiverse. I'm curious, like, do you feel like the MCU is getting a little bit too up its own ass about the multiverse these days? Or do you feel like, hey, this is a cool way to expand the world that they've already. Because it feels like with Loki and now What If, like the last, you know, 10 weeks worth of Marvel stuff has been multiverse, 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 basically, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Although I think like What If is truly disposable. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think you either want to watch it or you don't. And I mean, just based on like anecdotal numbers to our recap episodes, less people are watching it. You know what I mean? Or at least less people are watching it and then desiring to follow up on it. So it's
Right.
not lingering in people's minds
I
quite
think
as much.
I think like some of the here are all the Easter eggs in What If videos are still doing really well. So it's literally just people don't want to hear our thoughts on the show.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Got it. Got
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard to say because like I'm the guy that has like thousands of Spider-Man comics and it hasn't gotten old. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
what if like as a concept has had hundreds of issues. So, uh, are we done with the multiverse? I don't know. Maybe it's a lot all at once, but I mean, we're getting Eternals, and that's not about the multiverse as far as we know. Um, in regards to the Spider-Man comment, um, I have a bit of a mixed feeling about it, which is like I think it's cool that they're doing this story, and it could be really fun, and however they do it, I do find it. This is maybe more for my own interest that now we've got two Spider-Man movies that are about the multiverse, and I really like Peter Parker as the our listener said, like a guy that is swinging around his neighborhood and
Yeah.
fighting crimes in New York City. And these movies, and games and stuff take up so much of the cultural space for these characters
Mm-hmm.
that like it's going to be like an intrinsic part of Spider-Man now that he's some multiverse hopping hero. And when it was like a one-off, I was like, okay, that's fine. Like it doesn't ruin the kind of like down to the ground nature of Spider-Man. But like I do worry that we're gonna like because of this, all the ancillary Spider-Man products are going to be multiversal adventures and really take that character as an icon away from his like relatable place at the heart of Marvel's like New York everyman hero ness. Maybe that's the place for Miles now, is that he gets to be the like
Mm-hmm.
young guy that you relate to. But for me, I think that was always the appeal of Peter was, that relatability. And I don't know about you, David, but I'm not hopping through the multiverse all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say any more than what I've said about my own multiverse adventures. But rather than go through every single plot beat of this episode, Dan Gvozden, let's just talk about some of the highlights. You got Natasha Romanoff and Clint trying to save the world in Moscow. Who are like I'm just gonna put it out there like at least Clint is probably my least favorite Avenger, right? And so kind of a bummer that he's the one we're following here. I think Lake Bell does a great job playing Scarlett Johansson in this show, though. That it's actually really a delight to hear her performance, so I enjoyed that. And you in your show notes, you said I called it on what Ultron was last episode. Tell us more about how you predicted this episode, Dan Gvozden.
Well, I don't know. It just seemed like like what it was. It looked like it was Vision in Ultron's body, and that's in the comics.
Ultron and Vision's body, you mean, or vice versa?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But like literally, it looked like Vision in Ultron armor. I don't know. It's like a sandwich inside of a sandwich. I don't know how to put it, but yeah. I mean, there's an event in the comics called the Age of Ultron, which the Avengers movie was named after,
Mhm.
and bears no resemblance to, other than the fact that they both feature Ultron.
What
Um,
is the Age of Ultron, Dan Gvozden? Tell us.
well, you kind of get a hint of it here in this episode where he like destroys the entire planet, and there are a few Avengers left that can mount a resistance to him. Weirdly, the comic is kind of like Avengers Endgame. Like you get the characters, they all wake up, all these Avengers, and centered on Spider-Man, and the world is just destroyed, and Ultron bots are flying all over the planet, and he's taken over, but they need to use time travel to go back and prevent a series of events that would allow for Ultron's creation. And you get Wolverine going back through time and stabbing people with his claws. It's like a whole thing. So it's weird. It's like this and Endgame combined is kind of the Age of Ultron comics. So
Mm.
when I saw that character, I thought, oh, they're gonna do it. Like they're actually gonna like show us what the Age of Ultron would actually look like in this instance. And it turns out that's exactly what they were doing.
All right. So in this episode, we see Ultron take over Vision's body. He uses the Mind Stone to gain control, kills off Thanos. It feels like a. I don't know if this is true of the comics, but it feels like a lot of the show is meant to evoke these kinds of Thanos related gag laughs, like ha, like oh, wouldn't it be funny if somebody just killed Thanos in 3 seconds as opposed to taking like 5 hours to do it in the two movies, or wouldn't it be funny if uh, Star Lord convinced Thanos not to murder half of the world? You know, like just I think they're just supposed to be like kind of these throwaway gags, and it's whatever. But
I mean,
then
the fun is, and I think that it's like, hey, the power flip,
right.
like, oh, somebody who was really powerful before now is completely, useless against this new threat. And I don't know. Do you feel like that waters down? There was a complaint I remember when we were talking about Loki that finding the Infinity Stones having no power at all, like renders the events of Endgame at all like kind of like meaningless or feels really small
Yeah.
all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like I guess you run that risk here, but it doesn't really bother me other than the fact that I thought this particular case it was a cheat.
I think it's fine. But I mean, I'm not taking this show too seriously at this point. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
So Ultron's mission is what exactly? What do you interpret to be what Ultron's trying to do by destroying all these worlds?
Well, I mean, it's his own twisted version of peace in our time, which is
Mm.
like I guess what Tony programmed him to do. But his lens, in order to have peace, he needs to eradicate all life. Um, so it's weird because he's kind of takes on a role more akin to Thanos in the comics, where Thanos is like in love with death and is all about like universal destruction. That's kind of Ultron's thing here in this show and in the movie.
It is cool and kind of horrifying to see all these worlds from the movies brought to life, only to just then be laid waste to. I thought that was kind
Yeah.
of interesting to revisit. Oh, like yeah, I remember Xandar and all those Ego, all those other places, and it's kind of sad to see all of them laid waste to.
And also to see like the full power of the Infinity Gauntlet. I mean, like we see Thanos acquire all of the stones, and all he uses them to do is snap his fingers and erase half the universe. I say all he did was erase half the universe, but um, here you have a sustained enemy from Ultron who is just conjuring forth armies out of nowhere and destroying planets from their core. He basically is just rewriting the universe as he sees fit. And that was cool to at least spend like some time with the power fantasy of like what it would be to have the completed Infinity Gauntlet.
I actually wasn't a huge fan of that because I feel like the way that the Infinity Stones have been demonstrated in the films is so effective. Like you feel like these things are so powerful, you can snap your hands and like half the universe is erased, all that stuff. It just felt like all these armies of robots are completely unnecessary. You know, like if you and what and I guess I'm saying they didn't need to they didn't need to give him all the Infinity Stones, right? They could have given like one stone, and he's
Right.
using like the one stone to do all the stuff that he's doing. You know, if they did that though, you'd then have to deal with Thanos, who has all the stones, right? Like if he's going around destroying all the worlds, you would then have to deal with the fact that Thanos exists in this world. So I get
Hmm.
that that's a problem, but like I just feel like the whole thing felt very silly to me. The idea that this guy has all the Infinity Stones and he's like sending around these like armies of robots to everywhere. It's like, dude, you don't even need to snap your fingers. That's probably just like a pointing thing. Like you just point to it and
Right, right.
it's
He's a
gone.
fourth
You know, like
dimensional being, and he's bothering himself with like warfare.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I
It felt like
understand
a
that.
very 1980s 90s way of thinking of like how like future machines will think. You know, Um, I was watching Marquez Brownlee, MKBHD, and he's like, in the 80s, you know, we had these visions of like robots that would drive cars. Like I watched Total Recall the other day,
Right,
and there's like a little robot, Johnny Cab or whatever, that drives the vehicle. And he's like,
right.
what we didn't understand back then is in the future, the robot is the car. Like you don't need a physical being turning the wheel, and the robot is just in the machine. And it felt like this Ultron has not caught up with that mentality yet. You know,
But don't you want to have the robot in the car, David? Like, wouldn't that be more fun?
it's certainly more wasteful. You know, it takes up a lot more space. And also, by the way, as we've seen in this episode, extremely unreliable.
I mean, we've got a guy here who's like an arch villain, right? Like, consider him like creating these armies like equivalent to him twirling his mustache. How about that?
I think the one way they get around it is like the reason that I'm able to even believe at all that Ultron is not just laying waste to Clint and Natasha is he happens to be involved in this fight in this other universe, right? Or in this multiverse observation deck, basically, right?
Yeah, like pocket dimension or
Yeah,
something, or like
yeah,
world between worlds.
yeah. Um, so they try to like send a computer virus or whatever back to him. Doesn't work because he's not in the universe. And Uatu's at the end is like, well, I guess I need evil Doctor Strange's help. Um, anything else about this episode that you want to mention from a plot perspective
Well,
that you
I
found
thought
notable?
that the whole like Ultron robots, like descending on like them with Arnim Zola was a lot of fun, and the kind of flip of like Clinton Barton, from Endgame,
Oh,
him
thank God. Yes,
sacrificing
you mean
himself.
the death that should have happened in Endgame?
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Although Black Widow made me a little more amenable to that.
Black Widow the movie. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yes. But you're right. It should have been Clint for sure. Um, but no, I mean, I thought that scene was really fun. If it would be more fun if we hadn't gotten a half dozen scenes like that already in this series.
Right. Um, also interesting that the other thing is the fighting through the universes. That stuff was really cool. Like
Yes.
we saw, Captain Marvel and Thor fight through like multiple locations on Earth in a recent episode. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But like this of them like fighting through different galaxies and universes was like awesome. Like I love seeing just like visually how they conceived and executed that was just really cool. I liked all that stuff.
There's if listeners want to like get more kind of visuals from this, there's an issue of What If that I think this is directly taken from, and it's what if the Avengers fought Galactus, and like at the end of the story, like Uatu, the Watcher, steps in to fight Galactus, and they're both like larger than life, duking it out in armor, and all of these colors and blasts that are coming off of them. It's really an incredible issue. So that's What If Volume 2, number 41. That is, it's really great issue of What If, and I think this stuff comes right out of. But yeah, that was really cool, and I liked seeing them go through all these areas. I think there's a Kang reference here, David. Can I throw that in?
Yeah, throw it in there.
So they go to Egypt in one of these, and you can see there's almost like this sci-fi element to the pyramids. You can see like lights on them. Well, like Kang has a personality named Ramatut that is this like pharaoh version of himself that basically like brought this kind of like futuristic technology to ancient Egypt. And so I wonder if like that was a brief glimpse of like Ramatut slash Kang's um, kind of I guess base, if you will. And then there was another one of those flashes where it looks like the Vision slash Ultron is like eating the galaxy,
Mm-hmm.
and to me that was like I had to like double check to make sure it wasn't Galactus. Like he looked exactly like Galactus,
I
who
actually also recognize Galactus. Now, can you tell us who Galactus is for those who don't know?
right. So Galactus, I won't go too deep, but Galactus is like this, the universe that existed before the Marvel Comics universe. The last living survivor of that universe got into a ship that was able to survive the kind of heat death of that universe and the birth of a new universe. And in that process, he becomes Galactus, who is this kind of like cosmic scale. For all the new planets and galaxies that are created, Galactus is there to kind of like clean up the galaxy, and he devours planets, and he's looking for life-rich planets to devour. And famously, he sets his eyes on Earth in early Fantastic Four issues, and they have to defend the planet from Galactus, the World Eater. And they tried to make him into a movie character in the second Fantastic Four movie, The Rise of the Silver Surfer, but like they made him look like a cloud, but he's really just like this big dude that that's the best way to put it, with like a weird like headpiece that comes to the planet and just starts devouring it and killing all life on the planet. So, but there's so many visuals of him like biting galaxies and things like that. I thought this was kind of a direct reference to him there. And then there's another one that they go to where we see that like Captain America, Steve Rogers, is being sworn into as president. And in the universe that Miles Morales is from in the comics, the Ultimate Universe, there's a whole series where Captain America actually becomes the president. So that was kind of a neat nod to that here, if that was intentionally a
Yeah, I mean,
nod or
you see
just a
just
cool
a
idea.
glimpse of it in Times Square that he's getting sworn in, right? And it's a
Right.
nice little Easter egg. Joey Key in the chat asks, "Does Dan know if Watu's shield is made of magic like Doctor Strange? Found it interesting that it was in a different shape with different runes, but it might be future tech?" Question mark. Do you know anything about Watu's shield?
I thought about that a lot. I mean, at first I assumed it was Doctor Strange magic, but like looking more at it, it looks more like Eternals tech.
Hmm.
And in the comics, the Watchers and the Eternals are kind of, or not the Eternals, the oh my gosh, the Celestials. The Watchers and the Celestials are kind of like opposing forces to each other, and the Celestials created the Eternals, and the Eternals tech is kind of related to the Celestials. Like Ego was a celestial, if you remember from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So to me, it almost looked like celestial tech. Ultimately, you find out that the Watchers and Celestials aren't really quite as enemies as we thought. They're related to each other in some ways. So it made me think of the Eternals more than it made me think of like Doctor Strange in the kind of unique designs of it all. So I don't have an answer to that, but I wonder if the Watchers are going to show up more, and maybe the Eternals is a way of kind of bridging that gap in the main MCU.
Scott S asks, "How does Dormammu fit into all of this? Is he a being like Watu? Do you have any opinion on this?"
I do, yes. Well, so like Dormammu is from the dark dimension. I mean, Uatu mostly exists in the Prime universe, right? Like in the comics, he just like hangs out on the moon and watches people and shows up every now and again. But like there is like a whole separate dimension like a pocket universe. There's the dark dimension. You know, these things start to overlap. Like there's just a million different dimensions that like you have to square that with like, okay, so where does Asgard take place? Okay, Asgard is like a planet, but not really. And it's part of like Yggdrasil, the like world tree. Like how did it like the realms? How does that all fit? Like there's just a dimension, the dark dimension. There's things like the negative zone, and they all kind of overlap with our reality. So think of it like a I don't know, like the sunglasses in like They Live. Like it's just like a different filter,
Mm-hmm.
like under the same universe, so to speak. I don't know how else to really describe it.
All right. So is that a yes or a no that he's like Uatu?
I would say, I mean, him being kind of like a larger than life, like fourth dimensional being. Sure, I guess so. I mean, he's kind of like the god of the dark dimension.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
So he's
Uatu.
Uatu-esque, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Awatu is not like. I mean, there's a race. The Watchers are like a race
Yeah.
throughout the multiverse. So in many ways, they're like super powerful beings, just like Dormammu is. Um, but they're not like they don't have a hand in like creating the universe in the way that the Celestials and stuff do.
All right, Dan. We're already at 30 minutes, so we've already gone over how much I wanted to do on this. But let's do two last things. Okay. I want to talk about the very end, and I want to do our regular recurring segment, which
I
is
can't wait.
judge the voice acting quality of the people who are in this episode. Okay. I've already talked about how awesome Lake Bell is. I think she's amazing. Jeremy Renner plays Hawkeye. Benedict Cumberbatch, Doctor Strange. Toby Jones plays Arnim Zola.
That was
Um,
cool.
okay, now we're getting into some of the weirder things. So Mick Wingert again plays Tony Stark. I think he just sticks out like a sore thumb. It just sounds like someone doing a bad Robert Downey Jr. impression, in my opinion.
I
Um,
think it's hilarious that they just keep bringing back Tony Stark to kill him again. You know, like we didn't get enough of that in Endgame.
yeah,
Every episode he appears in the show, he's got to die a horrible death.
Ross Marquand. I believe he is the guy who played Red Skull, right?
That's correct.
In the movie, he plays Ultron in this episode. Uh, I don't know. It didn't really work for me. James Spader is such a unique voice
So
actor in that.
unique.
You know what I mean? Like, and I just couldn't help but think like this is kind of a more staid James Spader performance. What do you think of his performance as Ultron slash sub Ultron Sentries?
I mean, I agree with you. Like, I don't know how you do like a completely convincing impression of James
It's
Spader.
impossible. It's
It is
impossible.
impossible.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, putting him in the Vision and kind of toning it down a little bit, I thought worked okay for me. I mean, it's either that or like just don't have him speak at all because if you're not going to get James Spader like again like you said you're there's no replicating that
Yeah.
it is like truly one of a kind voice actor.
I'm gonna be honest. This episode made me appreciate Ultron as a character more in Age of Ultron.
That's fair. He
Yeah,
did have
because
a
I'm like,
lot more
oh man, James
personality.
Spader was so distinct. His voice was so distinct in that movie. Um,
It's a really weird interpretation of Ultron, but I'm here for it, I guess.
and then we have Alexandra Daniels playing Carol Danvers. I don't think it's a particularly like. I don't think she's really trying to be like Brie Larson sounding, in my opinion. Actually, maybe she is. Maybe I don't know. Not as huge of a fan of this performance. It sounds a little bit like I think the thing that separates the good performances from the bad in this show are does it sound like a bad impression or does it sound like a good completely other type of performance? There's very little in between, right? It's either a bad impression or they're not even trying to do the same thing. They're doing something completely different, and it can be pretty good.
I just
Um,
felt like her lines were really like stilted in this episode. Like you got that like kind of I
yeah,
would call it a bad Transformers joke, and then like the rest of her lines are basically like I'm more powerful than you, like that kind of depth. And so it's hard to really like fault an actor who's not really got a lot to work with.
I was wondering why it took her so long to show up.
Well,
She's like,
that's her thing,
you
David.
couldn't have showed up before he wiped out like 15. One day, Dan, do you think we're gonna find out like what are these worlds that Carol Danvers is off protecting while like Earth and Ego and Xandar are getting annihilated? You know, it's
I
gonna be
just
like, what's
hope
she
that it's
doing?
she's like got her like a Friday night poker game she's got to go to. Like I really want her character to just like we come in on her and she's got like some like boyfriend she's hanging out with or something, like just being totally neglectful, and it reframes everything we know about the character.
There's probably a good TikTok sketch to be made there about how like she's like hanging out with her boyfriend and then the beeper goes off and he's like, "What's that?" And she's like, "Oh, it's fine. It's gonna be everything's fine." And then like everything is getting completely destroyed. It's gonna be better in execution than I described it. Okay.
I will leave that to you, David.
Yes. All right. Final thoughts. At the end, we see evil Doctor Strange, and he's like, "Say the thing," and he's like, I see now. I need your help." What was this? Was this a callback to an earlier thing, Dan Gvozden?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean,
That felt so weird. I was like, was there a thing where he said you have to say this and then the thing happened? Like, I don't remember that.
yeah, I don't either. I thought it was a weird delivery. I was expecting him to say like something like that came to mind a little more immediately, but
I was like, did I?
Avengers Assemble or something.
I was like, this was either a deleted scene in the show or Dan Gvozden and I have completely forgotten what it is a reference to, right?
Yeah, I do think it's cool that like at a certain point where these characters accrue so much power that they can start to like hear the watcher.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it is weird to think that his kind of musings about like fate and the world in these stories are like diegetic. Like he's
right.
actually saying them,
He's actually saying them out loud.
Like who is he addressing? Is he addressing us? Like who is his audience in universe? Like
Well,
are
especially
we now like a fourth dimensional beings in the Marvel universe?
it's especially problematic because in this episode, it arguably endangers the entire multiverse.
Right. Like
Like,
just
if he
stop
had just
talking,
kept
dude.
his big mouth shut, maybe Ultron wouldn't have hurt him. You know what I mean? We don't know.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's going to take us to the end of this week's episode. If you enjoy our conversations, you want to support my work, you want to support more talks like this, a very easy way to do so. Go to patreon.com/Dave Chen. Kick in a few bucks, help me and Dan continue to have conversations like this. Go to amazingspidertalk.com. Support Dan's podcast. Until next time. Next week's the finale, Dan. We're going to bring this thing to a screeching close. Dan
An
Gvozden,
emphasis on screeching.
Dan Gvozden, thank you so much for talking with me today, man. Really appreciate it.
This was fun, David. I'm looking forward to the finale.